This is a brief video review of Urbanization, a game by Johnny Ebsen, published by Queen Games. Urbanization is a very tight 2 to 4 player Euro with no random elements. Players will have exactly 24 actions to develop their city during the Industrial Revolution, all while providing food, housing, and work for their citizens. Throughout the game, players will have the ability to hire characters and acquire inventions that make actions more powerful and aid in the development of their city. On the main board here is the area where players will develop their cities. It consists of spaces that have either 1 or 2 building areas. Each space has one money marker on it depicting its price. And this player area can be modified for different numbers of players. The 24 actions are tracked here. There will be 4 action phases over each of 6 rounds. There is a score track which ends at 45, but there are plus 45 markers for you to loop back around the beginning of the track. There are 4 barns for grain, 1 field, and 1 return area. The barn and field start with 1 grain marker per player, while the return area starts with 2 grain markers per player. There are areas for the 3 different types of work orders, which also represent different types of goods that can be produced, for different amounts of money, and at 1 of 3 different types of factories. Here, 3 factories are always in play, with a stack depicting the next factory to enter and refill one of the spots. Factories allow players to receive work orders, and once you build a factory, you can produce goods of that type for money and victory points. At the top of the board is the Inventions expansion track. Players can acquire inventions for permanent benefit throughout the game. These can also provide some final scoring bonuses. To the side are buildings that can be built: skyscrapers, houses, administrative buildings, and factories. There are also character cards that are chosen at the beginning of each round that will make actions more powerful. Players start with the player board that tracks citizens, housing, food, work, and the ability to tax. Also on the player board is player aid information that I will be detailing in a few minutes. Players start with 10 action markers, as well as $8. It is important to note early on that at the end of each round, you will score 2 points for each citizen you have. The number of citizens is equal to the lowest of the 3 tracks below it. In each of the 6 rounds, there are 3 phases. First, hire characters. Second, perform actions. And lastly, an administration phase, which has some scoring and cleanup for the next round. During the hire characters phase, the player with the least amount of victory points gets the mayor card, which gives him 1 victory point and makes him start player. This player begins by selecting an additional character, and in clockwise order, players select their 1 character card for the round. I'm going to explain the character cards along with the actions so you can see how everything works. The first action is buy land. A player selects a territory that shares an edge to a territory they already own. They pay $1 for each price marker on it, place an action marker in the territory, and then moves all price markers to any other territories still for sale. You can only buy 1 territory per action. If you had hired the real estate broker character card, you are able to switch the prices of 2 territories before purchasing one of them. Once you use the character card, you must discard it. The next action is erect buildings. To build a house, you must have a building ground available in one of your territories. You pay $2, place a house in the territory, gain 1 victory point, and you are able to move your housing marker track up 1 space. To build a skyscraper, you must have a house in play. Skyscrapers cost $3. You're going to replace the house with a skyscraper. You then gain 2 victory points and move your housing track up 1 more space. The final building that you can build is an administrative building. You do not need an empty building ground. You simply pay the $3 and you can gain 2 victory points for building that building. When you take the build action, you can build as many of one type of building that you have space for and can afford. If you had hired the architect, you pay $1 less for each building that you build. This card is discarded after one use. The next action is trade grain. On your turn, you may either buy or sell grain for the price associated with the barn. If you buy grain, you may purchase at most 1 grain marker from each barn, paying the cost and placing the grain on your grain track. You can, however, purchase more than 1 grain marker from the field, although this is expensive. If you wish to sell grain, you take the markers off of your track and must fill the barns to capacity from right to left, and you receive the amount of money depicted above the barn. This makes it so you sell grain for the cheapest amount until the barns are filled to capacity before you can sell for higher prices. If you hired the mill worker, you receive 2 grain for free from the field when you take the trade grain action. The next action is sow seeds. The player can place as many grain markers from their track in empty building spaces of territories they own. Later, when these are harvested, they will double the amount of grain that was sowed. If you hired the farmer card, he gives you 2 additional spots in which grain can be sowed. The next action is receive work orders. Of the 3 factories in play, a player places an action marker on the leftmost spot of the factory card and receives the respective work orders of that color to place on their track. If you fill the final spot on a factory card, you receive an additional $1. If you hire the foreman, you receive twice as many work orders than you normally receive from the spot when you take this action. The next action is attract industry. A player can attract industry if all the work order spots have been filled with action markers in a factory. A player must have an action marker available in order to take the factory in front of him, returning all action markers to their owners. You also must have a building area available to place a factory. This gains you 2 victory points. If you already have a factory in front of you and don't have or don't wish to use an empty building ground when you attract industry, you can upgrade a factory. The factory you replace must have a lower number than the factory you are replacing it with. You still gain 2 victory points, but the factory that you replace no longer is active for producing goods. If you hire the industry boss, you can attract industry and take a factory even if all the work order spots have not been filled. The next action is produce goods. You take the work order markers off of your track and place them on the matching color factories that you own on the upper right hand corner. You can produce as many goods at as many of your factory spaces that you wish. You receive money for each good, as well as 1 victory point per good. You receive $1 for each orange, 2 for each gray, and $3 for each white. If you hire the union leader, you can produce non-color matching goods at one of your factories and receive money according to the color of good that you used. The next action is collect taxes. You move your marker on the taxes track 1 spot to the left and collect $1 for each citizen you have. You may only do this as long as the tax marker is to the right of the citizen's marker. If you have the tax collector, you can move your tax marker 2 spaces to the left and collect twice. The higher your citizen's marker is, the more money you will get from taxing them, but the less likely you will be able to continue taxing them as your tax marker continues to move to the left. The last action is acquire invention. When you take this action, you move your action marker up 1 space for free to the right and pay $1 for every additional spot you wish to climb. You then select 1 invention from that docking space and earn 1 victory point for acquiring an invention. Inventions have a permanent benefit, so the earlier you get them, the more they can help you out throughout the game. Inventions higher in the track provide more benefit, and thus take more time investment and money to acquire them the higher you go. I won't go through all the inventions, but I'll give you an example of a few. The iron plow, for example, allows you to sow up to 2 seeds per building ground instead of the normal 1. The yellow at the top tells you that this invention has to do with grain. Another invention is the kerosene lamp. This one is gray at the top. This allows all of your gray factories to produce at least 2 goods when you take the produce goods action. And you receive 2 victory points at the end of the game for owning the oil refinery factory. If you happen to hire the professor card, you get to take both inventions from one docking space rather than just the one. After each player takes their 4 actions for the round, the administration phase takes place. First, you harvest. Each grain marker sowed returns back to your food track along with 1 extra grain marker per sown grain. Second, the lowest numbered face-up factory gets removed from the game, returning all action markers to their owners. In addition, any goods that were produced from the previous round get placed back in the respective work order piles, allowing the produced goods action to be taken again in the following round. You then determine the number of citizens based on the lowest number of housing, food, and work orders you have. These score 2 points per citizen. You then feed 1 grain per citizen that you have, and turn it into the return area. You also score 1 point for every 3 excess grain still left on your track. You then refill any surplus from the return area, which is 2 per player, to the field and barns, filling them to capacity from left to right, 1 per player per area. Lastly, you advance the game turn marker 1 space up and repeat 5 more times. At the end of the 6th round, the player with the largest sum of factory values in the upper left-hand corner of the factories gains 2 victory points. In addition, if you own inventions as well as the matching factory on it, you earn points as well. Overall, Urbanization is a pretty solid game. This game, probably more than any other game, is one where I always want 1 more action to accomplish something. There are 9 possible actions to take, but you've only got 24 actions total, so you have to be efficient. It's a very solid game design that doesn't necessarily bring anything new to the table, but it does what it's supposed to very well. Balancing the 3 tracks that determine citizens is a fun little puzzle. Your grain track fluctuates up and down as you feed citizens and as you buy, sell, and sow grain. Your work track fluctuates up and down as you receive work orders. Do you keep them on the track to provide work for your citizens, or do you churn out points through producing goods? Housing is the only track that continues to go up. All of this results in the nice brain burn necessary to manage your citizen population. You can shoot for high population, but pay the costs in high grain upkeep. You can keep your population low, which has low grain upkeep, but allows you to specialize in something else. You can go heavy on attracting industry and producing goods. You could do a little bit of everything if you choose. This is definitely a gamer's game. I think gamers will want to play with the Inventions expansion. Inventions add more synergy to the game, and they really open up more avenues for strategy. It also gives another area for player interaction and competition, and you can really have some nice combos with the inventions and the character cards. Now, I bought this game for some city building, but to be honest, when I'm playing, I get so caught up in the tightness and the mechanics of the game and squeezing out points, I kind of forget I'm developing a city. Although, when you take a step back and take a mental break, you really get to admire a pretty cool detailed city that you and the other players created. I've only played this with 2 players, but the physical area control aspect of land grabbing isn't as cutthroat as I thought it would be. And maybe this will change with future plays. That's not to say that it isn't tight. What keeps it tight is how expensive your adjacent territories become. But in a two-player game, I've never felt that I was going to be blocked out by the other player, and this will probably be different with more players. I think this game will be more interesting with more players for sure. The setup changes for 3 or 4 players, opens up more building territories, adds a few more factories, but nothing gets added to the character cards or invention cards, which means there are fewer to choose from in a 3 and 4 player game, which sort of forces you to take alternate routes of strategy. I think there is room for mini expansions, maybe new inventions that reward buildings or buying land, maybe different kinds of factories or more endgame bonuses. On a side note, for the two-player game, since we hardly use all the houses, we use one of the houses to track the housing on the player track. That just makes more visual sense. And if you want to get really fancy, you can use houses from other games, or even grain meeples. Anyways, this is a very solid game. If you like this type of tight Euro, I recommend giving this one a try. Thanks a lot.